Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cedarville Stories podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein, and today on the program, I'm talking with a pair of Cedarville University alumni who are currently serving our country as Border Patrol agents. Jodi Quinton Williams, who earned a degree in criminal justice in 2000, is a Border Patrol agent in charge along the northern border in Maine, while Jerami Cheatwood, a 1999 graduate with a degree in management, serves at the southern border. We'll talk about their years at Cedarville and how they weave their faith in Jesus in their roles as Border Patrol agents. So let's go to my conversation with Jodi Quinton Williams and Jerami Cheatwood on this week's Cedarville Stories podcast. It's great to have Jodi and Jerami on the podcast today. And when I read your story, one thing that surprised me was that even though you were here at the same time, you didn't know each other. So I don't know how that could happen at a small school, but it did. So I'm curious, how and when did you guys first meet and know that you guys are doing kind of the same kind of jobs?
I'm going to let Jerami take that at first because I think you were the one that actually came up to me. I think you had recognized me or something.
Yeah, so I think it was, when did you come to Police Week? 2017 or 18?
2017.
2017. So 2017, I was pulled up to Washington, D.C. I had been in the Border Patrol for about 8 years. I'd been pulled up to Washington, D.C. to plan a large Border Patrol response to Police Week. And I was there for a couple months and brought a whole team from all over the nation. And I was giving the brief, and I think Jodi introduced herself somehow. Cedarville came up when she said that. Right after the brief was done, I made a beeline for her. Hey, I went to Cedarville as well. I didn't recognize her. But it was just, she said something about, I had everybody stand up and introduce themselves. And she said something about she was a Cedarville graduate. I'd never even thought that there was a Cedarville graduate in the Border Patrol. So it was great to learn that there was another one of us in the Border Patrol. And I think she was a deputy patrol agent in charge at the time. I was a first line supervisor. So she had moved up quite a bit pretty quick there. So yeah, that's my half. Jodi, how about yourself?
Yes, I'm glad you filled in the blanks there because I couldn't remember. I just remembered you had come up to me and yeah, I'm sure there was an icebreaker or something, and we probably had to say something about ourselves or we went to school or something like that. So it makes sense that is where normally I say that, and a lot of people don't. It's just information that kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But no, it was great. So yeah, that was long time ago now.
Yeah. It had to be surprising and also somewhat encouraging to know that a fellow Cedarville student, a graduate, was doing really the same kind of work. So for context purposes, Jodi's from Maine. Jerami was originally from California. So I'm interested in knowing what brought you guys to Cedarville. I mean, both states are a far distance from the university. How did you hear of Cedarville? Why did you want to come to Cedarville as students?
So my sister graduated from Cedarville. She went there from 1992 to 1996. Okay. So she was class of 96. And just living kind of through her experiences while she was at school really kind of had me leaning towards Cedarville anyway. I went out to visit her her junior year, and I really kind of fell in love with the school. And spoke to the track coach and then the basketball coach, and kind of through sports, it really kind of solidified that was where I felt God was leading me. Okay. And honestly, just the right doors opened, and I was able to go in 1996. So my sister went there from 92 to 96, and then I went there from 96 to 2000. So that really was the kind of steering point for me.
That's neat. And we're going to talk about sports in just a moment, Jodi. But Jerami, what's your story? How did you find Cedarville?
So it was very similar in a sense that my sister went to Cedarville. And I think she graduated, in 91, 92, somewhere around there. And so that was kind of my introduction to Cedarville. And then ever since then, it kind of piqued my interest. I never went and visited. I just applied. And I actually wasn't sure if I was going to go. I ended up going in the winter of 96. The winter quarter was my first quarter there in 96, graduated in 99. But yeah, just a lot of prayer and just trying to figure out where I was going to go, what I was going to do after high school.
Right.
Kind of an odd time in life.
Yeah. So when you think back to your time at Cedarville, is there a favorite memory, a favorite highlight, maybe a favorite professor that still rings true to you today?
I had so many. I loved Dr. Murdoch. There was a lot. I had a lot of great experiences through sports. You know, I mean, like
Sure.
you said, being from Maine, and I didn't know anybody when I got to school. So having that core group of people that were just surrounded by, I was surrounded by them, by the team, and one of my teammates, we were actually in the same unit in Printy, and so it was kind of neat that worked out as well. So for me, having the team, I think it really helped me, whether it was homesickness or just, trying to fit in, being so far from home, and just going through sports while I was there. Those were some excellent memories. I didn't declare my major until the middle of my sophomore year, I think. So I had wonderful professors also in criminal justice. I loved the history aspect too.
Yeah. So let me go to sports, as Jodi's mentioned it a couple times. So Jodi was a really good athlete at Cedarville. What I know of was in 2000, she represented the Yellow Jackets at the NAI National Track and Field meet. She was a school record holder in the javelin, and then she did really well at the national meet. But tell us about that national meet and maybe the nerves that maybe you had leading into that and how you did. What was that like?
It was amazing, and the team in general. We had an excellent team. I mean, scholar athletes and athletes. We did very well in Ohio and in the Christian College Conference, and then there was a decent group of us that qualified for NAI. And when you think of nationals, and then it was in British Columbia, that was kind of strange, but it was also very exciting. So we were able to go to British Columbia for that. The experience was outstanding. The weather was not great. It was typical Northwest, kind of cool and rainy while we were there. It did not have my best meet, that's for sure. But the experience was outstanding. Coach Orchard and everybody who was part of the team then just made it a very memorable experience and one I'll never forget. That's for sure.
And am I right in saying that you were a record holder? Has that record been broken?
It has. Records are meant to be broken, and I forget how long it stood for a little while, but it's been broken several times since then. So it's great. It's great. I love to see it.
It's a great accomplishment that you can always take and hold on to. So, Jeremy, when you think back to your time at Cedarville, what comes to mind as memorable moments for you?
Well, for me, it was a bit of a culture shock. Going to the Midwest from California, it was a lot different.
Right.
But really, some friends that I made were very key in my life in really just learning to walk with God. But the one, I'm horrible with names, so I don't remember the professor's name, but my intro to Bible study professor, the things that he taught us in studying the Bible and how to pull the big points out and stuff like that really, really impacted the way that I look at the Bible, the way that I study the Bible. So, but I would say between that class and then just the culture and friends that I made there and learning how to walk with God, even just throughout life, it was instrumental in my life.
Yeah, I'm going to take a stab. Could it have been Chris Miller or Dan Estes that you said?
I think it was Miller.
Right.
I want to say Miller.
Yeah.
Miller sounds familiar. Yeah.
So fun fact on Dr. Miller, he comes to Maine quite often, and he is a speaker at a summer camp about 30 minutes south of here. So twice now I've been able to go down and listen to Dr. Miller when he speaks at this summer camp, and it's super bizarre. And he remembered me from basketball. So my sister and I went down, I don't think it was this past summer, the summer before, to go hear Dr. Miller at Living Waters Bible camp. And just another funny connection, like who would have thought Northern Maine, but Roger Black used to run the camp, and his daughter was also a graduate from Cedarville, Jessica Black. So just another Maine connection.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed from doing Cedarville Stories podcasts in the last 5 years is just how small a world we live in, because the connections with Cedarville, they're great. I mean, look at you guys. You guys met in Washington, D.C. Didn't know each other before that. I mean, there are so many Cedarville connections that it's not hard to uncover. And it's really exciting to see how the Lord takes people from this little village at this little college, which is now a larger university, and really does amazing things. You both have been serving at the borders for quite some time. Jodi began really right out of college. But Jerami, you didn't start until 2009 after an economic downturn led you away from your business into what you're doing now when you started at Eagle Pass, Texas, which has been in the news a lot the last few years. Jodi, was being in law enforcement your focus, your drive, your passion as a student at Cedarville?
When I selected criminal justice, that was definitely the path I was focusing on. I just wasn't sure at the time whether I was thinking federal or state or local. I have a cousin, he's retired now, but he was a Border Patrol agent in Brownfield, California.
Okay.
And while I was in college, he kept kind of, putting little feelers out all the time, like, hey, you ought to check out the Border Patrol. And then in 1999 and in early 2000, they had major hiring push. And that's when I was able to get hired. So at the time, I was January of 2000 when I applied, and I was at the academy in July. So it was a very expedited hiring process.
Yeah.
But I would say it was kind of his influence and, just knowing about his career, we kept in touch, and he definitely had an influence on kind of getting me to direct my path more towards federal law enforcement rather than state or local.
Is there any family background in law enforcement that also helped pave the way for you, or you're just kind of like a trailblazer and you set your own trail?
Yeah. So Sean McVicker, he was my cousin that got in first, and then I got in, and it is kind of funny because now I have 3 other cousins, and my nephew actually works here at my station now, which is very strange. So yes, it has definitely kind of, I don't know if I would say trailblazer, but it's definitely become something that's a little more common in the family, that's for sure.
Okay. So I alluded that the economic downturn was a major player in Jerami changing careers and moving into Border Patrol. How else did the Lord orchestrate your heart and mind toward this profession, this career?
For me, I also had a relative who was in the FBI. And just when I was, as you mentioned, I had a business that was based around, it was flooring. So it was based around the housing market. And when that crashed, started looking around. So I had a cousin that was in the FBI trying to get me to join the FBI. I had grown up around the border. I had friends that their parents, they went to our church, they were in the Border Patrol. So I knew all about it. And it was a little more adventurous, the Border Patrol than FBI, a little more out in the field, walking around, being out in the middle of it as opposed to investigative, which appealed to me a lot more. Right. So that's kind of, God kind of led me towards that. And my wife was open to moving wherever we needed to go. And my wife being from Central California, taking her to Eagle Pass was, I talked about culture shock before. That was even more of a culture shock for her.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so that's kind of how I got into the Border Patrol.
So I'm sure as our listeners are enjoying this conversation, they're asking, what does a Border Patrol agent do? So can you guys elaborate on the kinds of work that you do on a daily basis? Because we all watch the news, we all hear we see what we see, and we form our own conclusions. But what do you guys do on a daily basis?
I think we have some pretty good contrast here with me being on the northern border, and then Jerami can answer for like a day in the life of the southern border. So, our mission is to protect this country, whether it's from the illegal entry of drugs, weapons, people. And we patrol the border in between all the legal ports of entry. So what that can look like on the northern border is, like right now it's wintertime. So agents on snowmobile, agents on ATVs, agents out on the boat, or just on a vehicle, out in their vehicle or out on foot. So we have our agents, they get a zone. In my area, we're in Holton, Maine, and they're out there and they're patrolling their area however they can. We have lots of assets that they can use. Jeremy spoke to it earlier. Like, it is definitely the job for someone who is loves the outdoors and is adventurous, is open to trying new things and new duties. Like, there's not just one thing that you're going to get stuck doing. The sky's the limit, to be honest, in the Border Patrol.
What's your day like, Jeremy?
Yeah, so here at my station, we're responsible for about 37 miles of international border with Mexico. So we have agents out there in trucks, on ATVs, on dirt bikes, hiking through the mountains, just patrolling the border. We have roads that they're maintained that anybody that walks across it, we can tell that they walk across it. We also have guys in plain clothes out there running the highway, doing highway ops, trying to interdict narcotics, alien smuggling loads, just traversing our area. I have guys out there with drones. They're just flying drones, just searching the border, trying to back up those guys that are tracking people on the border. So basically, if it crosses, we're going to follow it with whatever means necessary, whether we call in our air and marine, which is our partners that have helicopters or different surveillance aircraft. We're going to utilize whatever assets we have to track those subjects that come across illegally.
That's interesting. So, Jodi, I know you worked in Arizona. You also now work in Maine. Have you always worked in the same roles, or have you done different jobs?
I've had several different jobs. When I was in Arizona, I was actually fortunate enough to get on the ATV unit. So for about 2 years, I got paid every day to ride an ATV. And there were certain days that I was like, I can't believe I get to do this and I get paid for it. I was a field training officer. I was an ATV instructor. I was a temporary, like an acting supervisor while I was down there in Arizona. I moved up here in 2007. As you said, I moved back home. I was fortunate to come back home in 2007. And then I became a supervisor in 2010. And that's the first line supervisor, which is the hardest job in the Border Patrol, supervising the line agents. The supervisors, they do. It's the hardest job, but it's can be the most rewarding. And then in 2017, I became the deputy patrol agent in charge of Holton Station. And then just this past November, I became the patrol agent in charge of Holton Station. So it's great. It's great to be here. It's great to be home with my family, near my family. So I definitely God has definitely blessed my career.
How many miles do you patrol on the northern border?
So we have 98. Our whole sector, we have about 200, right around 300 miles of land border. But we just have a massive coastal boundary, which a lot of people don't really think is the actual international boundary. However, our coastal and just water, we have lots of rivers and lakes here as well. So we have over 3,500 miles of water boundaries. So it makes patrolling up here very unique in certain areas. One of our stations, their entire border is all water boundary. Whereas some of us, it's just very deep, wooded, thick. Others is farmland. So we have such a diverse terrain up here, and the environment and the weather makes it very difficult. It's a challenge for sure.
That's fascinating. So, Jeremy, as I mentioned in the introduction, you studied management and computer science at Cedarville, and you learned some valuable skills through your courses and your faculty members that really helped you make some changes at the Border Patrol and make it more efficient. Can you elaborate on how your education played a role in really making things more efficient at the Border Patrol down where you were?
Yeah. So when I came into the Border Patrol out in Eagle Pass, when you first come in, everyone comes in as agent. You're just out there driving on what we call drags, where the roads where we drag tires in order to clean them up to detect people entering the United States. And so as you drag that road, you're looking for footprints, and then you start following the group. When they do cross, you just jump out on foot and start hiking. And one of the things that I noticed when we were doing that is you have to call in that, hey, the last time I drove this road, it was clean. It was 2:00 today, and this is where I did it from. Well, the guys were writing that in a paper log. And as I started noticing that it was in paper and you have to go search that, I had taken quite a few computer science courses and knew that there's got to be a better way to do this, a much better way. So on my evenings, I had about a year and a half in the patrol, 2 years in the patrol. On the evenings, I started building a database at home in order to track traffic, like when we would detect sign or footprints that we were following, what groups we were actively working, as well as basically what we would call a cut log. When we looked down a road, we would say, hey, this road is clean. So I started building that, brought it to my patrol agent in charge, who's in charge of the station, showed it to him, and he said, all right, great, you're on a detail, you're going to make this work. And that was, I had about 2.5 years in the patrol, and I started building that database, quickly took off to where I had never worked with a SQL server, learned that on my own, but just the base that I got at Cedarville, to be able to do that allowed me to build a program which quickly became utilized in all of Texas. Then I got pulled up to headquarters at about 3.5 years in the patrol, the border patrol, about 3.5 years in, and became one of the experts that was helping the developers of what we call tracking sign cutting and modeling. It's a TSM database that's a nationwide database that is currently being utilized by all of the Border Patrol to not just that type of activity, but a broad range that I didn't even know was happening on the northern border and other areas of the Border Patrol that are now logged into that one system. So I just got to sit on the focus group that really developed that and picked out the important parts. So it was a very broad experience.
I never knew that. That's amazing. Yeah. We use that database almost every day, and I never knew you had a part of that.
What do you think about that, Jodi? I mean, one of your Cedarville colleagues was on the steering committee or steering board, or the brains behind that database. That's impressive.
That is very impressive. Every time we get these new databases that make our life easier, like he said, paper logs. I mean, we've had them for everything. Fuel consumption to cut logs to gotaways to whatever. So that is amazing. I am truly impressed. And it kind of goes back to, there is a job for any type of person in the Border Patrol. People who are excellent, photographers or camera folks or computer science degrees. I mean, it's not just, what everybody thinks of. There's something for everyone.
Yeah. So as we begin to close out this podcast, and I can see I'm going to run out of time with all the questions I have. But before we close this one, I have to believe being a border agent is dangerous. Like a police officer is dangerous. What kind of dangers have you guys experienced that you can share so our listeners can really understand and maybe even pray for your safety or pray for you and your teams as you do your jobs?
I know for many people, it's kind of, yes, it's the danger of the job inherently, but, oftentimes people are out by themselves. A lot of law enforcement agencies are fortunate enough to have pairs, partners. For the Border Patrol, that's pretty infrequent. We generally are by ourselves. You could be on the midnight shift, so middle of the night by yourself, out in the desert or out in the woods, wherever it may be. And kind of that fear of the unknown. You never know, what is in that vehicle when you walk up to it. You never know that person that you're going to encounter. So that's why, we train our agents very well to be prepared for anything that could happen. So plan for the worst, and kind of prepare for it and then hope for the best. Sure. But for sure, you've seen stuff on the news, and those dangers are pretty much every day. And it's not just a southern border problem. We have those same exact problems on the northern border. So absolutely pray for your Border Patrol agents. There's a lot of them out there. Yeah. And they definitely need it.
Is it? My perception is the southern border is more dangerous than the northern border, but it's not necessarily so, is it?
No.
No, I think the danger is real on both northern and southern, and for all law enforcement. We just lost an agent on the northern border to gunfire just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's dangerous everywhere. But as Jodi alluded to, the Border Patrol has one of the toughest law enforcement academies out there. We get some of the best training that you can imagine. And so when you're not only how to get out of a bad situation, but how to keep yourself even from getting in that situation. And that's what I think Border Patrol agents are really good at doing, is that officer presence. We're taught that from day one, officer presence. You get in there, you're observant, you know what's going on. You can stop an issue before it even starts, because oftentimes, I mean, I've been out there and caught a group of people that just crossed illegally, 7, 8 people, and I'm completely by myself with backup an hour away. You just start handcuffing people together, take charge, and you go. I mean, it's through that training that you get. And I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'7", 140 pounds. I mean, I'm not a huge guy.
Right.
But just with the officer presence and a lot of prayer, and God's on my side, on all our sides, you know, and prayer definitely helps.
Yeah. And that's where I want to go next. And I'll go to you, Jerami. So how does your faith get you through? How does your faith weave in with your profession so that you can do your job the most effective way that you can?
I think faith is everything in our lives. You know, God is the center of everything. And I know in every aspect that I go into, I do it with prayer, and I do it with God in mind. And the great thing about the Border Patrol is we also have chaplains, which I'm a collateral chaplain. So that's one of my collateral duties, is to be a chaplain. That's actually how I met Jodi, as I was national chaplain at the time.
Right.
And was able to plan Police Week. So, but I think God is in every aspect, no matter what career you're in, whether you're in finance or whether you're teaching somewhere, God is the center of everything. So he weaves through everything in our lives.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So in my final question for this podcast, I want to make it abundantly clear that this podcast is apolitical. I'm not taking any political sides, and I don't want you to take any political sides. But with that said, for those watching and listening to this podcast, we see on the national news that it appears as though border security hasn't been really all that strong in recent years. What can you share from your vantage point to address that issue or that perception? Is that reality? Or how is border security on the northern and the southern borders?
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been in a long time. You know, this is my 25th year, and there's definitely a kind of a roller coaster effect, and it gets felt all the way down to the agent level.
Right.
And without getting political, things definitely have changed, and they are going to change. You know, for the agents, I think job satisfaction is definitely going to be considerably improved this year. But yeah, it has been a roller coaster effect. You know, we have to tell people, like, you know, it can be good. We've all been through the good times and the bad times. And you know, we are at the will of the administration that is currently in power. So
right.
That is kind of, you know, what fuels that roller coaster. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Jerami?
Yeah, it's just to echo the same that regardless of what the political alignment is or the politics, our agents are out there every day protecting the border. We're apprehending everybody that comes across, finding the terrorists out of the group and pulling them out and putting them in jail, finding the criminals, putting them in jail. So job satisfaction is going up. I will say that. But we're still out there doing our job every day, regardless of what politics are. We're law enforcement. We're apolitical. Yep. We're out there to enforce the laws.
Well, I want to thank you for serving our country in this way for 25 years for Jodi, and not quite as many for Jerami, but you're
15.
But you're 15. That's right. So, but we are out of time for this podcast. But if you don't mind, just let's continue this conversation. And for our listeners, we're going to talk more about border security and their roles. And I really encourage you to join us next week as we'll continue this conversation on the Cedarville Stories podcast. You won't want to miss it. But for this week, thanks for joining me on the podcast, Jerami and Jodi. Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. Be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.